Majority of the people in the country are in the working age population. Productivity in the country is high. The dependents, which is the old age people and the young age people, are less. So this kind of a pattern for the demographics is called demographic window. Bulk of the population is in the working age population. Now what will happen after some time, as life expectancy increases, death rate decreases and birth rate also decreases, this slowly starts shifting upwards. So eventually we'll have a system like this, where the older people are the bulk of the population. This is what happened to Japan. So then the demographic window is over. So demographic dividend is making use of the heightened working age population. However, just working age population is not enough. We need to have a healthy and educated population also, which is why health and education are primary areas of government investment. So we need to invest in maternal nutrition, sanitation, and also changing some social norms. We'll discuss this a bit later. Only then can India exploit the demographic window. So human capital is key for potential growth. So we have to invest in these areas as we discussed. Now government is doing some aspects of it through skills training. Even Skill India, etc. comes into the same productivity discussion. But these are all later life interventions. Please remember that. However, early life interventions are very, very important, because early inequalities become later inequalities. So if one child got less nutrition and less attention when it was small, even if you give extra attention later, it does not make up, because these are called dynamic complementarities by economic survey. So the complementary nature of things become dynamic in nature. Complementary means education also helps health. Health also helps education. Early health affects early education. Early education affects later education. Later education affects whether you get a job or not. These are called dynamic complementarities. So all early inequalities are multiplied. Now consider the case of a Dalit child. The Dalit child probably gets much less nutrition initially because the mother was malnourished probably. Then it gets much less attention initially because the mother has to immediately start working after the pregnancy, cannot really rest, etc. And then much less education because education opportunities are less, much less quality education also. Now later on at higher education level, etc., if government starts giving reservations for government job, etc., does that really make up for all the early inequalities? No, it does not. So government also has to make sure the playing ground is level for everyone, even at the early stage, and not just provide reservation at the later stage. So mother's health and nutritional status are very important. Early on any disease comes, those also becomes very important. So dynamic complementaries means human capital accumulation and cognitive development, everything depends first on healthy mother, then on the healthy baby, then on learning better, staying longer in school, then on getting a job, etc. And overall skill begets skill is a language utilized. So mother has to be healthy, baby has to be healthy, education has to be proper, child should be able to understand, stay longer in school because it's capable of doing. Any child which is not performing well in school, what happens in rural India? They say this child is anyway an idiot, let's take him out of school, let him work in the field. So these things happen because the same baby was actually neglected early on also. So overall these inequalities multiply over time, so this has to be reduced. So health of environment, very important. This is about pollution and stuff like that. Mother's health, very important. Together becomes early life condition. So health of environment includes disease, pollution, etc. Here things like sanitation, Swachh Bharat scheme, all those things come in here. So Swachh Bharat comes in here. Whereas mother's health, specific intervention is required, becomes early life condition. Once early life is there, then schooling has to be provided properly. Again, government or private sector will provide this. The richer people get better schooling, so human capital starts getting developed, and as human capital overall in the country improves, economic growth improves, or our potential GDP improves. So overall economic survey says that highest returns are for targeting young children and in utero. In utero means while in the uterus or while mother is still carrying. Those are the areas we have to focus on. Second reason is that it is also cheaper for the government, easier to target, less delivery capacity is required from the state. So overall, early life investment provide a great opportunity for G. So that is the biggest takeaway from the chapter. Now economic survey says demographic dividend should be a big point of discussion because we are currently in the middle of our demographic dividend. And if you look at the East Asian miracle, East Asian miracle is basically East Asian economies. They suddenly started growing very fast. Now economic survey says 1/3 of the East Asian miracle or the growth in East Asian economies like Singapore, Thailand, etc. was because of their demographic dividend was during that time. So is demographic destiny then? Is growth always dependent on demography only? Now, India's own working age population will rise till around 2040. That means we have 25 years of demographic dividend to exploit, or a demographic window of 25 years. Please remember this and use it. So demography, in other words, is an opportunity. If we can utilize it properly, it will work. If not, it need not be destiny also. In last year's economic survey, they are told demographic window or demographic dividend can also become a demographic time bomb. So that is also something we have to take care. If these people are not healthy, if they're not educated, what will happen? Later they will not have employment, and if unemployment is very high, they lose trust in the democracy itself, and democracy itself might suffer. So then demographic window might become a demographic time bomb. Now, height is something that is being discussed separately in the economic survey because of a lot of newspaper discussion went on about height of Indian children, comparing India with sub-Saharan Africa, etc. So government was slightly embarrassed also. So here the government acknowledges, economic survey acknowledges that this is a problem in India. Height is a good proxy because height and cognitive development go hand in hand. So overall, if height is low, here we're not talking about normal differences in height, we're talking about standard growth versus normal growth. So rural urban height gap is there. Rural children are much more stunted in comparison to urban children, and even across the world our children are much shorter than the healthy average, which is acknowledging that Indian children tend to be stunted. So that is a problem which has to be corrected. Now, neonatal mortality, the first 1000 days are very important. Now during this time, child's chances depend on mother. So again, the same overall understanding: mother, child, first few days, and then how to improve that. So 70% of infants in India die in the first month. Again, prelims question potential. So underweight mothers is the reason for underweight kids. So healthy mothers will mean healthy kids. Somehow we have to remove this problem of underweight mothers also. So 42% of Indian mothers are underweight and they don't gain much also. Now how to help these mothers? There finally jam comes. So if mothers are underweight, give them some jam and they'll gain more weight. So how this is going to work is, basically maternal health is very important for the rest of the life of the child. So it's better to help the mother. It will be equivalent to helping the person itself. So National Food Security Act, enacted in 2013, has a system under which all pregnant women will get a universal cash entitlement of 6,000 rupees. It doesn't matter whether it's BPL, etc. 6,000 rupees has been promised to them. Now problem is, the woman should first of all receive cash payment. The family should actually use the payment for better quality food and actually more rest for pregnant women, because pregnant women in rural India, immediately after pregnancy, they're forced to work again, which causes problems. Then it will help. However, getting it into the hands is not an easy task. And also the extra cash might not be used for these things. It might be used for other things. So how to monitor this? That is where JAM can come. So through JAM we can directly get the funds into the hands of the pregnant woman itself. This is called a conditional cash transfer because the cash transfer only happens if you are pregnant. Now firstly, cash transfer should be accompanied with education. The family and the woman should understand the importance of weight gain during pregnancy and the importance of breastfeeding, etc. Only then the cash transfer will be more effective. Also, it should be as early as possible without delays, without administrative cost, etc., so that it can be used properly. Now, it has been tried in some areas. It has been found that in easy to monitor areas such as village health, sanitation, weight gain during pregnancy, child weight monitoring, etc., 30% improvement happened. However, less easy to monitor areas like breastfeeding, corrective treatment of diarrhea, etc., only 4 to 5% increased. However, economic survey is positive that with proper design and significant investment of state capacity, we can improve maternal health. So it is a focus area. It is a place where government investment should happen. Now, second part of the chapter discusses the environmental issue. So one part is maternal health. Maternal health and environmental health together determines early life health. So now we discuss the environmental issue. The biggest environmental problem in India is open defecation. So this affects drinking water, sanitation, etc. So even air pollution is a big problem, a growing problem in India, which also has a early environmental effect on children. However, open defecation is the area economic survey highlights. However, the areas which is highlighted in open defecation can also be applied for drinking water, sanitation, air pollution also. Please keep the same structure in mind. So enteric infection due to open defecation is the biggest problem in India, especially in rural India. Now in India it's much more common than even other poorer countries. India has the largest rural open defecation rate in South Asia. Even in Bangladesh, for example, it's completely eliminated. See, if it's possible in Bangladesh, why not in India? These are the questions that is being raised. So this is just a comparison. You can see rural open defecation rate in South Asia. India is the topper there. Sri Lanka is 0. Bangladesh almost gone. Nepal is again much lower than India. Pakistan is much lower than India. Now, as we discuss in the tablet, etc., normally in any metric you take, Pakistan at least will be worse than India. So we get some satisfaction out of that. But in this case, even Pakistan is so much above India. So here is a social externality. Now, what is the meaning of an externality again? So one person is doing some activity, a third party is getting affected. Somebody else who's not involved is getting affected. So people are doing open defecation, but other people are getting affected. Even people who do not practice open defecation also get affected because of that. That is an example of a social externality. Now it causes two kinds of diseases. These are potential prelims questions. It can cause diarrhea, which essentially means that you eat and you don't actually get the nutrients because everything gets lost through diarrhea. Second is environmental enteropathy. Again, the intestines get affected. They are not able to absorb nutrition properly. So in both cases, the food being consumed also can't be used. So that becomes a big problem. If more and more people start openly defecating, the overall village starts suffering a lot. So as it becomes 100%, the height for age ratio starts declining rapidly. So overall, this is an example of a social externality. Individual actions have big social effects. Now, why is this happening? Bangladesh could eliminate it. Pakistan, it's much lower. So why is it happening? Now, there are some behavioral reasons. Behavioral reasons means people behave in certain ways. They're just used to it. That is the reason why some of these problems are happening. Now, WHO and UNICEF has monitored and has told that 61% of all rural Indians defecate in the open. Even in sub-Saharan Africa, only 32% defecate. Now, more interestingly, there are households which actually have working latrines in which some people are using it, but some other people go and defecate in the open itself. Now that means it might not be income constrained. It's not like these people cannot afford a latrine. It is some other reason that is forcing them to go out and defecate. Now this economic survey says is potentially because the pits need to be emptied. Now this takes us back all the way to Gandhiji, etc. The Gandhiji also realized that India has a sanitation problem. Swachh Bharat initiative was started back then itself. Gandhiji realized that sanitation problem is happening because people don't clean the pits or people don't clean the night soil, etc. Because they have this behavioral constraint. They believe it is associated with untouchability, because if you go and clean it yourself, then you become an untouchable, or it's a kind of work that is only for lower caste, etc. So because of this disgust or because of the social pressure, Indians are not doing it properly. Now pits need to be emptied. Now in other countries, it's a very easy procedure. They employ people to do it. But because of India's history of untouchability, only certain castes, certain people are doing it. Now because of it, it becomes a huge problem. Now a lot of people prefer to just go out and defecate, because otherwise the latrine pit emptying becomes a big issue for them and they can't find people for doing it and they will not do it themselves. So because of all these and because of the social exclusion oppression areas, behavioral reasons are causing this problem in India. And that is where Swachh Bharat mission comes in. So it has raised the profile of the problem and has committed to ending it quickly. 80 lakh toilets have been built. We also have to make it more behaviorally oriented. So UN Sustainable Development Goal is there, 2030 completion. Now India has been completing declining open defecation by 1 percentage point every year. If you want to meet the target of 2030, we have to triple our rate. So this is a major challenge. So we have to behaviorally change people. We have to educate people. We have to make them understand that it's not a problem that you have to clean it. The cleaning part need not be caste oriented, untouchability oriented anymore. And also there are new types of toilets being built which uses the excreta for compost, etc. So those aspects also can be useful. So technology can also have an intervention impact. So overall economic survey says there are some high impact intervention pre-pregnancy, during pregnancy, postnatal, especially for diarrhea, deworming, vitamin A supplementation, encouragement to breastfeed. These are all areas where government should invest money. Now what are the other high return investment avenues? We have seen some high return investment. What else is there? So overall early life invention is very important, and there we have National Food Security Act, and in addressing open defecation we have Swachh Bharat mission. So it seems like some of the important areas are being covered already. However, changing the behavioral norms is a big issue which is not being addressed currently. So government can build clinic, transfer money to pregnant mothers, build latrine, all these things government can do. But how does one ask people to go to clinic? How will you force the pregnant mothers or the family to actually use the money in the right manner? How will you get the people to go to the latrine and not in the open spaces? How do you make the right usage of physical capital is a big question. So there, things like Janani Suraksha Yojana, etc., which is educational in nature, delivered through Anganwadis, is helping. So proportion of breastfeeding mothers has been increasing in some areas. So some encouraging things. However, we have to do something called nudges. Now, nudge is an important word. It has become very, very popular across the world now. So government is using some influencing tactics. So Give It Up campaign was there, in which we tried to persuade the rich people to give up subsidies. Reducing social prejudice against girls is something we are doing. Beti Padhao, Beti Bachao, etc. So again, we are trying to remove some social prejudices. Educating people about health externalities of defecating in the open to Swachh Bharat, etc. Encouraging citizens to keep public spaces clean, Swachh Bharat. So these are all things that people never used to even think about. Now they are being forced to think about it. Now here, we need systematic ways. So what economic survey proposes is, let's have a nudge unit. Nudge unit means, what is the meaning of a nudge? If you force someone to do something, it's a push. But you can also nudge someone to do something. You can just point the way and they might do it themselves. That is a nudge. So government needs a nudge unit where government tries to persuade people, influence people. That is required, is what the economic survey says. So with that, we complete chapter 5 also. Now we move into chapter 6. Now chapter 6, we come back to JAM and subsidies. Now chapter 6 is very simple again. We have subsidies. We have subsidies in certain areas. LPG subsidies is there, fertilizer subsidy is there, food subsidy is there. Now in all these areas, problem is lot of the subsidy is actually going to these guys. Now how to solve it? We have to target better so that it does not go to them and goes to the poor people. So in this chapter, economic survey analyzes how big a problem is this. How much extra is the well-off getting, which areas are where the well-off is getting, which areas are where subsidies has to be brought down, and which areas where targeting has to improve. So there are two aspects to it, targeting and rationalizing. Rationalizing is required if the subsidy is not required in that area, it has to be rationalized. Targeting is required if subsidy is required, is very important, but it's getting leakage is very high, then you have to target it for the poor. So this is the focus area of chapter 6. We'll again take a very short break and then we'll resume. Hello everyone, welcome back. We'll start with chapter 6 now. So again, this chapter is about targeting of subsidies and some other aspects as well. So basically, is government services going to the poor or to the rich? That is the question of the chapter. So again, it's a very simple chapter, very focused kind of chapter, so very easy chapter for us. So the question is, why are we helping the well-off? Almost 4.2% of the entire GDP of the country goes into subsidizing various commodities and services. So can you think of any commodity subsidized by the government? Can you think of any services subsidized by the government? So commodity subsidized by the government will be food through the public distribution system, and the service subsidized by the government would be railways, for example, which is subsidized by the government. So there are multiple examples like this, but 4.2% of GDP goes into these things. Now many of these policies provide benefits to the well-off. In fact, mostly to the well-off, as we'll see. Now do we really need to help the well-off? Is India so rich that we can spend money helping the well-off? Are all our poor people already taken care of? Or should we divert this towards the poor people? That's the question. So 7 areas economic survey takes up one by one and investigates them and decides if money is going to the well-off or to the poor people. First is small saving scheme. Second is kerosene. Now here in kerosene, etc. is tax and subsidy. So all these guys are tax subsidy ones. Only this one is non-tax, non-subsidy. Third is railways. Fourth is electricity. Fifth is LPG. Sixth is gold. Seventh is aviation, turbine fuel or ATF. Combining all these guys, economic survey says 1 lakh crore rupees is going to the well-off. So well-off is getting 1 lakh crore from the government. Should the government of India be giving 1 lakh crore to the well-off people? That is a big question. Now overall, if you provide tax incentives, which is linked to small savings scheme, then you benefit not even the middle class but the top guys. So wherever you give tax incentives in savings, etc., you're not even benefiting the middle class but the top guys. Now please remember this, because we'll come back to this in the pension fund discussion, which is won't be covered fully in economic survey because economic survey does not cover it in great detail, but in the current affairs sections it will be covered. But link it back to the discussion economic survey. Government did this after the economic survey, but the economic survey had already given the logic behind it. So we will discuss the logic today. So first of all, small savings. Are these really small savings? So originally government created these small saving schemes. When I say small, I am putting it under quotation marks. So we wanted to mobilize small earners. We wanted to help them save. So we put a lot of small saving schemes and we gave above market deposit rate. So if a normal savings deposit is only getting 6%, a small savings deposit will give 10%. And we also made it accessible across the country through post office, etc. So this is the original idea behind small saving schemes. Now recently, discussion around it, the problem was that government and some policymakers said that small saving schemes have higher interest rate. Now, if small savings schemes have higher interest rate, normal schemes have lower interest rate. Where will people put their money? More money will start going to small savings schemes. Now, if the RBI wants to change some monetary policy, what will happen is that because most of it is going to small savings schemes, the normal financial system is more constrained, because they are not able to change their rates without competing with the small saving schemes. So overall, what the government did is that government reduced the interest on small saving schemes. So difference is less, so monetary policy transmission can happen in a more normal manner. So again, very simple. If deposit rate is high currently and lending rate is also high currently, can you reduce lending rate without reducing deposit rate? That is a big question. Or can you increase lending rate without consequential effects in deposit rate also? But whenever you change deposit rate, because small savings schemes rates are different, there will be a competition between them. So that is the possibility of lack of monetary policy transmission. So again, small savings, economic survey says that these are actually not small. And it says there are 3 types of schemes. There is one actually small scheme, postal deposits, schemes for elderly women, etc. So actually small is what economic survey says. There are some not so small schemes. Example is the PPF, the controversial area, Public Provident Fund. And this is what later led to controversy for the government after the budget, post-budget controversies. Economic survey came before budget and had given the explanation also. Not small at all schemes. These are tax-free bonds. So these companies, what happens is companies like HUDCO, NHA, etc., Highway Authority. So these people, they want money for certain projects. These are public sector companies. Now, how do they get this money? They can issue bonds. Now, these bonds, when people buy, these companies will get money for financing infrastructure projects. Now, why would people funnel money into these bonds? Because you get tax saving there. So people put money into tax-free infrastructure bonds into these companies, but these are not small at all schemes, is what economic survey says. Now, why do people put money into these schemes? Is it because of more interest rate or is it because of some other reason? Primarily, it's because of tax treatment. Now, economic survey says EET principle should be done. E means exempt. So when contributing, when you're putting money into PPF, when you're putting money into a tax-free bond, when you're putting money into postal deposit, etc., it should not be taxed. So contribution should be tax-free. Second is you get interest from these guys. When you put money into schemes, into tax bonds, etc., you get some interest. That interest income also should be tax-free. However, when you withdraw the money, the principal and the interest, then you should be taxed. That is what economic survey is saying. So this is exactly what got played out in the PPF discussion later. So when you're putting money in, don't tax. In your income, don't tax. But when you take money out, tax. Why? Why tax when you take money out? Because that will incentivize people to keep the money in the saving scheme itself. That will incentivize more saving and disincentivize dissaving. Dissaving means reducing your saving. So if you have 10,000 saved, if you take money out of your saving, that is called dissaving, reducing of saving. So EET principle will encourage saving and discourage dissaving. So this is the recommendation, and this EET principle was later applied to Public Provident Fund and led to disastrous results for the government, at least for the short period of time. So overall, government economic survey analyzes each of these things. Post office savings account is TTT, which means it's taxed at all 3 areas. Post office 5-year time deposit, long-term deposit is ETE, which means only interest is taxed. Post office monthly income account scheme, all 3 are taxed again. Senior citizen savings scheme, only interest is taxed. National savings certificate, again through post office, only interest is taxed. Tax-free bonds, only interest is exempt. Both other things are taxed. So these are some aspects. Now if you look at public provident fund, exempt, exempt, exempt. All three are exempt. Now economic survey did not like this. Economic survey said this is bad because this is a not so small scheme. So we have to change this. We have to move it to EET. So overall, this is a recommendation. This is just a calculation of what is actually small, what is not so small, etc. Subsidy is given maximum to not so small areas, whereas minimum to the actually small area. So is it really small saving scheme is what economic survey is asking. So most of the actually small are TTT. They are getting taxed at every level. Contribution, interest and taking out, everything is getting taxed. By contrast, PPF, not so small, is EEE. Everything is completely exempt, but up to a limit of 1.5. And the not small at all guys, the tax bonds are TET. Again, interest is exempt for them. And there are no limits also. Does this make sense is what economic survey is saying. Why are we taxing the actually small guys and not taxing the not so small and not small at all guys? So overall, PPF and tax-free bonds are having very high income or return, which is why a lot of people invest in that. However, economic survey clearly after analysis says that PPF and tax bonds, the people who invest are the top guys. The people who are in the 97.3 or 98.4 percentiles of income distribution, which means, so okay, suppose you are in the 97th percentile of income distribution. That means that only 3% of the whole country is above you in income. If you are in 99th percentile of income distribution, only 1% of country is above you. Only top 1% is above you. If you are 99.5 percentile of income distribution, that means you are in the top 1% of the country. Now only the top 3% to 2% of the country are investing in the PPF scheme and the tax bonds is what the economic survey is saying. And why are we subsidizing those things? Why are we tax exempting those things? So there's a complete box for this, box 6.1 of this chapter. It explains first of all why income tax is biased against savings, and we need to provide a tax system that eliminates this bias, promotes savings. So overall, promoting saving is important is what economic survey says. And we have to provide tax incentive. Now normally we go for exempt, exempt, exempt. However, economic survey says this is bad because it incentivizes savings. However, not net savings. Withdrawal is also being exempt. So we have to move towards EET, because then only withdrawal is not exempt, so people will not withdraw unless required. Now yes, economic survey says that all this distorts the entire savings market. All the money is going into these schemes and not going into normal deposits, and that is affecting the financial sector also. The real small savers are not getting much benefit also. So overall, tax incentives are designed badly, economically inefficient, inequitable, and not serve the intended purpose of mobilizing saving. They only distort the market. So we have to redefine the whole tax incentive system is what the economic survey says. And the first step the government took towards that was a PPF redesigning, which the government had to take the step back again. Now there are two ways, as we discussed earlier. It can be TEE or EET. So EET is what the economic survey primarily recommends. So we should move in a phased manner for EET. So across the board, EET is what is recommended. So PPF was tried, which became a slight failure for the government. Now this is also essential in India because we want people to save more. The government will not be able to help the poor people as we transition away into becoming a more older country. We are a young country now. Once we become an old country, the people have to be self-sufficient because the social net is not there. So if somehow we can build savings for the people, then they will be able to have a self-financing instead of a social security system. Now there are other bounties also. Economic survey analyzes one by one. First of all, gold. Gold is a demerit good because the rich consume most of it. So 20% of the population account for 80% of total gold consumption. However, gold is only taxed at 1 to 1.6%. Now economic survey says normal goods are 26%, gold is 1.6%. The difference of 25% is the effective subsidy on gold. And this full 25 percentage point subsidy is going only to the better off. 98% of the subsidy goes to the better off is what the economic survey has calculated. So again, gold we have to start taxing more is the recommendation. Other bounties is railways. Now across category, economic survey does a calculation and overall comes out with the recommendation that 34% is going to the better off, 69% to the poor. In LPG, 91% is going to the better off. So again, not an optimal allocation. In electricity, economic survey says on the face of it, it looks like poor are having 49% subsidy and the rich are having 32% subsidy. But 84% of electricity consumption is by the rich people. So effectively, most of the total subsidy goes to the rich people only. The poor people don't consume as much electricity. So effectively, still a bounty. The aviation fuel, is taxed at 20% compared to diesel at 55 to 61%. So the difference becomes an effective subsidy because they're taxed at much lower rate than diesel and petrol. Now who uses aviation fuel? The people who travel by flight. So again the rich are being subsidized here, a 30 percentage point subsidy for them. Now kerosene, 9.16 per liter is the PDS rate. So if you compare against market rate, an effective subsidy of 38% is there. It is same for rich and poor. However, 50% of kerosene under PDS is consumed by well-off through ghost beneficiaries, etc. So still 50% of benefit is still going to the well-off section of the population. Now, if you want to assess all these subsidies, there are two assessment criteria according to economic survey: equity and effectiveness. Equity should be there, effectiveness should be there. Now, what is equity here? If majority of expenditure is by poor households, for example food, then they should be taxed at low rate, they should be made exempt from taxation, they should even be subsidized because poor people depend on these goods. So government has to help the poor people. So if a large share of expenditure on any good is by the better off, then the good should be taxed at higher rates. If a large share of expenditure on any good is by the poor people, then the good should be subsidized, exempt from taxation or low rate. So if you look at electricity, large share of expenditure is by the better off. So should we give universal subsidy? Probably not. Effectiveness means even if a good is a merit good, which means it actually deserves a tax exemption or a subsidy, how effective is the subsidy? This depends on targeting. So equity is all about whether it's required or not, whether it's a merit good or not, merit, demerit, etc. We have discussed in tablet. So again, merit good is something that actually deserves a subsidy, and demerit good does not deserve a subsidy. So only merit good should get subsidy in the first place. But can we target properly or not is the next question. How much of the total expenditure is by the poor? If poor account for a small share, then mostly it is going to the well-off. So again, how much expenditure is by the poor is another question that determines effectiveness. If the rich is getting most of the subsidy, then it's not a good subsidy again. So we have to have equitable subsidies and effective subsidies. Now here we do a cost benefit analysis, or economic survey does a cost benefit analysis. So how do you determine whether government intervention is useful or not? One, benefit is the share of subsidy going to the target group. Cost is the proportion that leads to the non-target group. So is the target group getting the majority, or how much is going to non-target group? This is called the benefit to cost ratio, or share of expenditure of the economy in the household budgets of the poor divided by share of consumption of the particular economy by the non-target group. So effectively, consumption by poor is to consumption by rich. This will tell you if the subsidy is worth it or not. Now based on this, economic survey has constructed a line. Now if this zero line means effectively it's same, now it should be, this is the actual line in India, or this is the line which the economic survey proposes. Now if you look at this, anything which is below the line means that mostly better off people are getting it. So which are the ones below the line? LPG, railways, kerosene, electricity, all these are below the line. Gold is also below the line. ATF is also below the line. If you look at diesel and petrol, they are actually above the line. The largest bounties, the further away from the line, the larger it is. So you can see largest bounties are provided for LPG, gold, and to some extent ATF is what economic survey says. Now again it quantifies this effective subsidy rate, etc. The numbers are not really important. Now here this number is only important because adding everything together, economic survey also adds the amount from PPF and from small savings schemes, and it comes out with the 1 lakh crore figure. So 1 lakh crore figure of subsidy, the figure comes from this calculation. That's the only reason I have shown this figure here. Otherwise the numbers are not important. So overall, what is the conclusion? A lot of the money is going to the better off. We have to address it, and that is very important. And there are two reasons for this. One is that fiscal cost of the government comes down, welfare provided by the government goes up, and also credibility of the government increases in two ways. One, people start trusting the government more. Second, other market oriented reforms also improve. So this 1 lakh crore is a big leakage, and it could have been used for helping the more deserving people. So that is the overall discussion of the bounties to the well-off. It's a very simple chapter. Only takeaway is that money is going in which direction. Some of the examples you should also realize, you should also keep in your mind. The examples will be useful if the question comes. Also prelims questions can come, which of the following, etc. Highlighting different subsidies, which of the following is a merit good for subsidy, etc. can be asked as a question. So those aspects has to be kept in mind. Now we move on to chapter 7 discussion. So here the chapter 7 discussion is basically about the fiscal capacity, the fiscal policy. So chapter 7 is about fiscal policy. Now, fiscal policy, the idea is again how to get more or be more effective by spending less, or the quality of spending. So what is the government's plan about the fiscal policy? Government wants to adopt a neutral policy. However, there are areas where focus is required and there are areas where expenditure has to be reduced. Now, get more also means income has to increase, income for the government has to increase, expenditure of the government has to decrease. At the same time, effectiveness of the expenditure has to increase. So this is the overall challenge for the fiscal policy. Increase income, decrease expenditure, increase effectiveness. Overall, maintain a neutral policy. That is the focus. So again, let's take a very short break of 2 to 3 minutes and then we'll resume. Please use this time to ask any doubts you might be having, etc. Hello everyone, welcome back. So this chapter, Economic Survey, talks about two aspects. One is about expenditure, second is about taxation. Now the question throughout the discussion is, are we taxing enough? Are we spending enough? And Economic Survey actually has to admit that neither are we taxing enough nor are we spending enough. Now, before we get into the discussion, Economic Survey says taxation is important for other reasons as well. Taxation is a glue that keeps the people of the country together. Taxation is something that helps people contribute to the country and builds legitimacy for the state. So that is why taxation is an economic glue, is what Economic Survey says. So it becomes a two-way accountability relationship. The citizen is accountable to the state, one, in preserving the laws of the state, second, in providing the income for the state by giving tax. State is accountable to the people because state is using the people's money and the people's trust in ruling the country. So against this, they are assessing India's fiscal capacity. Fiscal capacity is two aspects, right? Are we able to tax properly, earn enough money? Are we able to spend properly, spend enough money? That is fiscal capacity. Capacity to tax, capacity to spend is fiscal capacity. So tax to GDP ratio will tell us our capacity to tax. Spending to GDP ratio will tell us our capacity to spend. In both these aspects, Economic Survey says that India under taxes and underspends related to comparable countries. But Economic Survey then does some calculation magic and says that if we control for the level of economic development, basically means that if we assume all countries to be at the same economic development position, for example, a country like Germany can spend more than India because they are much more economically developed. If we compare them at the same standard of economic development India is at this point versus something at the same level for Germany's history, then India neither undertaxes nor underspends is what Economic Survey says. However, then Economic Survey says we should also control for political development. And when we control for political development also, India does tax and spend less. So overall we can say India is undertaxing and underspending. Now Economic Survey tries to make a case that India is not an outlier, but at the same time it also admits India is an outlier. But some aspects of the discussion requires India is not an outlier situation. So that is because economic development, according to that, India is not an outlier. Just keep that in mind. Now, if you look at the individual income tax payers, how many people are actually paying in the country? Only 4% of the entire population of the country, the adult population of the country, is actually paying taxes. The desirable estimate according to Economic Survey is at least 1/4 of the country. So 4% is too low. That means majority of the people of the country are outside the tax bracket. They're not part of this economic glue. So then that is a big issue. So these things will be elaborated in the later discussions. So fiscal capacity is about spending and about taxation, and especially about taxation because only by taxing you can spend. How else will you get the money? So overall we have to build a long-run fiscal capacity. So one easy way to do it is by refraining from raising exemption. What is the exemption raising? Let's say initially government says people below 50,000 don't have to pay any tax. Then government say people below 1 lakh income don't have to pay any tax. Then government says 1,50,000 people don't have to pay any tax. This is called raising the exemption threshold. Now if we can stop doing this, more people will come under the tax net. This is one example which Economic Survey says. We'll come back to that later. This will be a natural growth. At the same time, fiscal capacity also creates legitimacy for the state, and this is possible by prioritizing improved delivery of essential services. Why do people give money to the state? On the assurance that the state will utilize it properly. So if the government can improve service delivery, then the people will have more trust in the government and thus taxation can improve. So legitimacy is also required for proper taxation. That is a core part of this discussion. So if you compare India and the world, again the same discussion. India undertaxes and underspends. Control for level of economic development, India does not. First India does, then India does not. However, if you control for political development, then again India does undertax, underspend. And even in the case of individual income tax payers, India is in a bad situation, or India is an outlier. So this is a summary slide. This is the slide which you have to remember. So taxation is important for political and economic development. So taxation is an obligation. It's a foundation. All this language is there in the economic survey. The meaning is the same as what we already discussed. Now more and more people into tax net, especially through direct taxation, will help in realizing the promise of Indian democracy, because people are now more invested in the democracy. They feel they are part of the democracy. Now there is a contract here, right? People are giving money to a state. State has to deliver services in return. So essential services has to be given, and the less well-off has to be protected. If most of it goes to well-off, again legitimacy comes down. Now, if a citizen does not feel the state is doing its part of the contract properly, the citizen also will be less interested in maintaining his part of the contract. He will try to avoid tax, etc. Now the moment a citizen stops paying taxes, he becomes a free rider, using a service without paying, or he can even exit the state itself, not using the service at all. Both reduces the accountability of the state. Now here economic survey says an expression, no representation without taxation. This is actually the inverse of what was used in the American Revolution, no taxation without representation. Economic survey says the inverse is also applicable. Without taxation, you cannot have proper representation, because people start exiting. So it's a two-way relationship which has to be maintained. Again, the same language is used again and again in this chapter. Now early on in the previous lecture, we had seen one graph and seen that this is the overall trend in the world. On this side economic development, on this side political development or institutions. We had seen China had attained high economic development without attaining high political development. India had attained high political development without attaining high economic development. Now for China's case, they can go here or like this. In India's case, we can go here or up. We can go two directions. Now whether India will go here or here will depend on whether we are going to improve economically or decline politically. So if the legitimacy of the government starts coming down, we'll actually go down and not up. However, if we can preserve the legitimacy and still have economic development, we'll go up. So that is why economic development is very important. Now in India's case, economic development lacks political development. What is the meaning of that? It means that for simple things, for example, a flood comes, we are able to respond, we are able to rescue people. Uttarakhand floods or Chennai floods, we are able to actually rescue people and actually recover from the operation also. However, a simple thing like proper irrigation, wastage of water, we are not able to address. We are able to address a flood, but we are not able to give proper drainage facilities. So day-to-day aspects India is not able to fulfill, but more important things we are having the capacity to fulfill. So this is the reason of saying India is having economic development lagging political development. Now the ability to spend and tax is part of legitimacy, as we discussed. Only if you feel state is doing properly, citizens are willing to pay taxes. So both are required. So capacity, fiscal capacity is as much about technical details as about state legitimacy. People have to feel that they are part of the country. Now overall, does India tax less? This discussion is elaborated in the economic survey. We already saw the answer to the question. There's no suspense here. But how does the economic survey go about it? Let's have a very brief look at this. So if you compare the rich countries of the world, India is taxing much less. Even by comparing to our own market peers, emerging market countries, India is taxing much less. India is lowest among the BRICS nations, lower than the OECD, etc. India's tax to GDP ratio is 16.6%. The OECD average is around 34%. And India has also made limited progress. India has not been progressing properly. The rich countries have invested in tax collection capacity, and more people are brought under the tax net. So if you control for everything, economic and political development, India is about 5.4 percentage points less than the comparable nation. So India is currently at 16.6. We have to reach around 20. Now if you look at last year's economic survey, they had told that 25% is the target for tax to GDP ratio. So now economic survey is saying close to 20 also would be okay. Now India is also spending too less. Compared to other countries, India is also spending much less than other countries. However, economic survey says India is not an outlier. This is a very qualified statement. So it's very difficult to agree with the economic survey on this particular statement. So here all the countries are shown here. So tax to GDP ratio and the percentage of GDP etc. is shown here. So you can see China is around 19.4. India 16.6, Brazil is 35.6. Expenditure again, India is only 26.6. Other countries are much higher. Expenditure on human capital, India is very very low compared to Brazil, which is 11.0, etc. So overall, we can say this part is not required. Forget about this. We can say India's taxing too less, direct tax is too less, individual income tax is positive. So their individual income tax, India is higher than other countries. Expenditure is too less. Health and education expenditure is too less. So all these areas, India is in the bad territory. So again, first deliver vital services, then redistribute. India has enshrined the word socialist in its preamble itself. So socialism means redistribution. However, if a state starts taxing people a lot and then redistributing without delivering essential services properly, then it becomes an issue. If state starts taxing a lot without delivery capacity, then again it becomes an issue because legitimacy comes down. So economic survey clearly says first deliver services properly, then you think about taxation increase, etc. And this is substantiated by Europe, US, etc. Their history, they had done the same kind of system. Now, unless the middle class perceives there is some benefit from the state, they will not be willing to finance the state. Who will finance the state? The rich and the middle class. So middle class and the poor has to benefit from the state before they are willing to finance. And this has to be delivered through essential services. So even basic things like roads, if the government can't provide properly, why would people give taxes to the government? Now this is called exiting from the state, important terminology. So these are things people might do when they exit from the state. So when a person loses trust in the state, first they'll start avoiding taxes or minimize taxes as much as possible. They don't like paying taxes because they feel, I don't get any benefit from taxes, why should I pay any taxes? They'll start building gated communities, etc. Why? Because government is not providing proper electricity, my community will have its own backup. Government is not providing proper environment, my community will have its own park. So all these things start happening. So, and government is not providing proper security, my community will have its own security. So people start living in gated communities. They'll start using diesel generators to obtain their own power. They'll go to private hospitals and not to public hospitals. They will go to private education institutions, not to public education institutions. And all these things are happening in India. So these are symptoms of what is wrong in the country. When the rich people feel they cannot use public services, that means the state is not providing good quality public services. So overall, middle class exits. When middle class exit, the educated class is exiting. The moment educated class exits, who will keep the government accountable? Who will question the government? So the state starts shrinking, legitimacy starts eroding, more exit happens. This becomes a vicious cycle. So overall, basic public goods has to be provided in a proper manner, otherwise this bad phenomenon of exiting the state will happen. Now again, number of taxpayers discussion. Higher income taxes, share of income tax is very important. So GST alone will not have much of an effect. In case you're thinking about GST, economic survey says not enough. Number of taxpayers is a key indicator of fiscal capacity, accountability and citizen participation. So if more people are paying taxes, that means more people are keen on participating in the state. They want to be part of the state and they will actually make sure the state does things properly because they are paying taxes. So in India, roughly 5.5% of the earning individuals are in the tax net, which means it's very very low, 4 to 5%. So we have a huge gap to become a full tax paying democracy. So only close to 85% of the economy is outside the tax net is what the economic survey says, and that is again a very pathetic figure which we have to improve. So again, there's a nice graph here which shows how bad India's situation is. You can see country like Norway, almost 100% of the people are paying taxes, which means high citizen participation, etc. Whereas in India, it is so close to 5% to 4%. So which are the countries below India? China is even lower, which is one statistic in which China is lower than in India in some of our discussions today. Mexico is lower, Argentina is lower, Indonesia is lower. So you can see some of these countries which are lower are actually non-democracies. So democracies tend to be much higher, which is why India is a complete outlier here. So overall, in this case also same discussion. Controlling for level of economic development, India is not an outlier, economic survey says. However, if you control for political development also, yes, India becomes an outlier. Now 4% is the current one, 23% or 1/4 of the country should be paying taxes. So this is a number we have to strive towards. Now how to reach there? Economic survey says there's a concept of missing taxpayers. So same concept. Suppose this is the exemption limit, and suppose a lot of people were below the exemption limit. As income increases, more people will start coming above the exemption limit. So in India, we have been raising exemption limit faster than income growth. In China, they just kept the exemption limit fixed. So as income increases, people start going above and they become part of the tax net. So in India, because exemption limit has been continuously increased, people who could have been part of the tax net is exempted from the tax net, and those are called the missing taxpayers. The Economic Survey actually calculates the missing taxpayers. So suppose the exempt threshold limit in 2008-2009 was 1,50,000. If we had maintained it till 2012-13, an additional 1.65 crore people would have been included. That's an addition of around 39.5%, and overall tax to GDP would have increased by 0.32% just by not raising the threshold. However, every budget, the finance minister knows that there are votes to be gained by raising the threshold limit, so the government tends to raise the threshold limit every now and then. So that has been a cause of missing taxpayers. So this is the exemption limit being raised continuously, whereas the per capita income is going like this. So exemption limit has started going much above per capita income. Now we have come to a box 7.1, which compares India's personal income distribution. How unequal a society is India. So there is a Gini coefficient which actually measures this. Here, Piketty's method. Thomas Piketty has written a major landmark book in economics, Capital in the 21st Century. So for tablet students and for classroom students, we have done a full discussion of the book in the class itself. Very, very important book. However, one part of the book is now part of the Economic Survey also. So Economic Survey uses Piketty's method to determine if India is very unequal or not. So this graph just shows that the top 1% is having big share, is having this much share. Top 0.5% is having this much, etc. The graph itself is not important. I just wanted to highlight the Thomas Piketty part. The next slide gives the summary of the box. So overall, a growing concentration of income at the top is experienced. The top three groups account for 12.4%, 9.4% and 5% of the income of the entire Indian economy. So bulk of the total income of the economy is appropriated by the top 5% or the top 1 to 5%. This is comparable to UK and US. However, India has been changing faster than the UK and the US since 1990s. So if you look at the previous slide, inequality in India has started increasing rapidly after 1990. So it was here somewhere and then it is rapidly changed to here. So you can see a rapid increase here. So the fast growing 2000s, where the service economy took off, etc., overall inequality just started increasing. The top end of India's income distribution started increasing. That is the effect of these fast growing years. So this is also called jobless growth, etc., as we discussed in the tablet lectures. So jobless growth obviously will mean that some people start becoming richer, the poor stay poor. Now reform through inaction is what the Economic Survey says. It's a funny line, so it's useful to use also. So if we can just not change the income thresholds and allow natural growth in income to increase number of taxpayers, that will be a reform through inaction. So this is the income distribution that the Economic Survey highlights. However, beyond inaction, we have to do something else also, right? So Economic Survey mentions 4 points on how to build fiscal capacity. First is that government should prioritize essential services. Again, same chapter discusses the same thing again and again. So don't worry, the essential core of the chapter we already covered. This is just an elaboration. So public infrastructure, law and order, pollution, congestion. These are areas which affect everybody. So if the government can solve these problems, then it becomes very easy to build fiscal capacity because people will start participating in the state. Second, reducing corruption becomes a high priority because it again undermines legitimacy. Citizens should trust in the government. Third, subsidies to the well-off need to be scaled back, which is the previous chapter we discussed. Tax exemptions has to be removed, especially the EEE system has to move towards a EET system, is what Economic Survey has already told you. And the better off has to be actually taxed, because if people see that the better off are taxed, then again they respect the state more. And fourth, property taxation needs to be developed. So Economic Survey says that property taxation is important, and India is a highly neglected area. We don't even get proper data about property taxation. So this is another area to be developed. This is what the Economic Survey says. If the state can focus on these 4 areas, then we can again start building fiscal capacity for the 21st century. So about property taxes, the Economic Survey concludes the chapter by talking about property taxes. It is desirable, first of all, because it's progressive, because the rich people tend to own more land. It's buoyant because with income taxes increase. Difficult to evade because it's a non-mobile good. You can't hide land. It's very difficult to hide. In a locker, you can't hide land. And today's technology, GPS mapping, etc., very easy to identify land. So it is a tax which is easy to apply. So because of those things, property taxes should be considered, is what Economic Survey says. Now, who will collect the property taxes? Now, again, tablet students and classroom students, and also students who have actually followed and completed the basic economics books will know that which are the taxes collected by the center, which are the taxes collected by the state. Primarily, a lot of urban property taxes are collected by the state. So the local government's finances gets a boost if property taxes get a boost. So if property taxes can be increased, who gets the benefit? Local governments gets the benefit, and they can provide local public goods, strengthen democratic accountability and decentralization and federal nature of the Indian setup. So these benefits mean that property taxes will help people participate also more in the local government. Also, property speculation will come down, so unnecessary bubbles etc. will not happen. And smart cities is a big focus area of government. So economic survey brings a smart cities aspect into this, requires smart public finance but smart local public finance. It has to be at a local level also. A sound property taxation regime will allow public finance and will help India's urban future. So India's cities can really start investing in these areas with proper property taxation regime. So this is where economic survey closes this particular chapter. We'll pick up from the next lecture onwards. So in the next 10 to 15 minutes, I'll address all the questions you might be having. So again, the fundamental basics of economics we cannot discuss in the economic survey lectures because it's a current affairs lecture. If you are having difficulty with the basics of economics, then I'm advising you that you should go back to NCERT, you should go back to the basic textbooks, or you should come to us and we'll be helping you with the tablet course etc. Because the basics of economics cannot be discussed in 1 to 2 hours. It requires 50 to 60 hours to discuss properly. However, some of the areas which is connected to the discussion today and the previous day, I'll be addressing now the questions. If you have any other questions, please ask now itself and we'll discuss those as well. So some questions have come in, so I'll quickly discuss the questions and then we'll close the lecture. One question is, why should we focus on saving? So a person has asked, even if people spend more or if consumption happens more, won't growth still happen in the economy? Why should we focus on savings? The reason is that, first of all, savings has two aspects to it. One, it promotes investment in the economy. The second aspect is that it also provides for the old age of the same person. So it has a public aspect as well as a private aspect. Now in a country like India where we don't have a proper social security net, people should provide for their own private old age. So encouraging savings becomes important because in the old age they can take care of themselves and the state is not required. Second aspect is that savings encourage long-term investment. Consumption is more short-term in nature. So investment in return will go into capital goods etc. Whereas consumption will primarily flow into consumer goods, and we want investment also to happen, which is why overall stimulating savings is important for any government. So hope that is clear. We'll move on to the next question now. Another person has asked, why is gold or aviation fuel subsidized? Gold and aviation fuel is not subsidized. Please understand the language of the economic survey. Economic survey says gold is effectively subsidized. There's an effective subsidy on gold. What is the meaning of that? Gold is being charged only a 1% taxation, whereas normal goods are charged 26%. So the difference between them becomes 25%, and this is called the effective subsidy. Now the question here is, why is gold being taxed so low? Shouldn't the tax on gold be increased? That is the question economic survey is asking. Same for aviation turbine fuel also. Some people have asked the difference between merit and non-merit goods. Now this is actually a core economy topic. However, we'll try to quickly discuss this. Now, any good will have private benefit and public benefit. Now, some goods will have only private benefit and no public benefit. If private benefit is more than public benefit, then it's called a non-merit good. For example, food. When a farmer cultivates food, let's say you subsidize food through PDS. Who's benefiting there? The person who's consuming the food is having private benefit, so the full subsidy goes to him. Does the society benefit directly by him consuming food? Not so much. So private benefit is less than public benefit in the case of PDS. So it becomes a non-merit good. Same for fertilizer. A lot of examples are given for non-merit goods. Now think of only first level effect. Don't think of second level effects etc. for this. Now suppose this becomes for pregnant woman. So pregnant woman is getting more food from the government. Here private benefit is definitely there, but maybe public benefit is more because the child is also benefited. So the family is also benefited. So because of that, public benefit might be higher. Then it becomes a merit good. A better example is something like education, especially primary education, initial education. So in education, primary education only if you provide to someone, private benefit is very less. It is not much actually. In fact, But only primary education will not even fetch you good jobs and stuff. However, public benefit is very high because now this person is able to understand the importance of feeding pregnant women, is able to understand the importance of maintaining agriculture in the same proper manner, is able to process the importance of drip irrigation, is able to actually open bank accounts. Everything becomes easier because he at least is literate. So that becomes a merit good. So when private benefit is more than public benefit, non-merit good. When private benefit is less than public benefit, that is a merit good. That is a differentiation between these two things. Based on that categorization, we should be avoiding subsidy, tax reduction, etc. So some people have still asked the difference between meaning of price wedge. The price wedge is when the farmer at the farm gate gets, say, 20 rupees from the intermediary, from mandi for example, and the final retailer, he gets 100 rupees for the same thing. So this difference of 80 that has happened is called the price wedge. This happens because of lot of intermediaries, because the market is not properly organized, etc. Ideally, this difference should be as low as possible. Now, some people have also asked what is the meaning of a nudge unit again. So a nudge, in economic parlance, the word nudge means without forcing people, influence people to do some activity. For example, the example we normally discuss in class is the one of organ donation. So Richard Taylor is the economist who proposed the nudge theory. So he said that in some countries organ donation is more, in some countries it's less. Is it because those people are better than the other people? No. It was because in one country it was written, in USA for example it was written, tick this box if you want to donate. Whereas in Norway it was written, tick this box if you don't want to donate. Now people don't want to actively take a decision that I don't want to donate, because that will feel like a bad thing for them. So most of the people in Norway were donating, most of the people in US were not donating. So just by changing the language, people are starting to donate more. This is called the example of a nudge. You just give a nudge to the people. They want to do good things. It is just that they are not bothered to think about it. Just make them think and they'll do the good things. So a nudge unit is a unit or a government department which will nudge people into doing the right things. Hope that is clear. Now we'll discuss the next question. Somebody has asked why GST is not enough to maintain the tax to GDP ratio. So economic survey does not say GST is not enough to maintain tax to GDP ratio. Economic survey says indirect tax is not the determinant of legitimacy. Direct tax has to improve, and GST being an indirect tax can't help there. So we have to go beyond GST. That is the meaning of that terminology. So somebody has asked no representation without taxation. That is more of a history topic than economic topic. No representation without taxation effectively was American war cry for independence, because they claim that British Parliament cannot impose taxes on America without American representation in the British Parliament. So representation is required for the government to have the right to give taxes. So economic surveys reverse that and is saying that if the government wants to have the right to give taxes, then if the government is having the right to give taxes, or is only then representation can be provided. So the language has been reversed. Two questions have come. What is reform through inaction, and how direct taxes can be increased? These are two linked questions. How? Because economic survey is saying suppose a threshold of income tax exemption is fixed at 1,50,000. Just by not increasing this, as income of people increase, over time incomes increase, more and more people will start entering the tax net. If we keep increasing this, these people will stay outside the tax net. So just by keeping it there, that is actually inaction, right? We're not doing anything. We're just not doing anything. So that is reform through inaction. So through that, more people will start paying taxes, and hence direct taxes will increase. So economic survey's recommendation is do reform through inaction and thus increase direct taxes. So that's it, guys. Most of the questions have been answered now. And the rest of the questions are too basic in nature. That much level of economic understanding is required to be attempting the exam in 2016. However, having said that, I provided the economic survey with underlining as well as the NCERT textbooks for you. So wherever you're having problems in basics, please make sure you go and read the NCERT textbook that is provided. If you have not received it, you can also download it for free from the NCERT site. But the textbook that is provided for you is collated into a single text, easier to read. Now what I'll try to do is I'll also try to mark some important areas in the textbook itself for you guys. However, the economic survey is already marked out. So every sentence that is important in the economic survey till what we have covered is highlighted. Please make sure you revise properly. Please make sure you see the language of the economic survey. You imbibe the language of economic survey. Please make sure you write in that language itself. Every answer you write in GS paper 3 should be in that language. And also the questions that come in the prelims also is derived from the same kind of language. So if you understand the logic of economics, all economics question becomes very easy. So please make sure you're strong in basics. So economics survey should be a lesson for everyone, that the importance of economics basics. So with that, we close today's lecture. We'll be coming back in the next week to discuss the rest of the economics survey chapters in volume 1. Then we'll have a current affairs session as well before coming back to economics survey. Thanks for listening.